Hi, everyone. It's me, Kathryn. I am so excited to be back today on one of NoCD's live webinars. I've been on many times before at this point, and I just love sharing my experiences as an individual with OCD and as an OCD advocate, and sharing any wisdom, knowledge, or advice that I've accumulated over the years during my recovery and during my advocacy. So while people are still entering the webinar, I thought I would just kind of take a moment to introduce myself, just so you all know who is giving you this information today. Um, so I'm Kathryn. I am 19 years old. I'm from San Francisco, California, and I am someone who lives with OCD. I also struggle with anxiety and depression. And currently, I'm a college student. I'm a sophomore in college, and I'm studying clinical psychology and minoring in women and gender studies. So I love sharing my own experiences, and I find that in sharing my own experiences, I'm helping myself in a sense and just gaining a better understanding of myself and my own OCD. I've been in OCD recovery for quite some time. I think that I'm trying to think, it's been a while at this point. I really started doing intensive ERP, exposure and response prevention. Oops, there's like a fly. ERP when I was around 14 years old. And things were just getting really bad with my OCD. And I felt that I wasn't going to get better. I thought that this is the way that I needed to live and that nothing would help. And I thought that ERP was too hard. I wasn't motivated to do it. But I think once I started to see the impact that OCD was having on my life, I really started to see how miserable I was because of it and how I really wasn't living life the way that life should be lived. And I was just living in constant, kind of inescapable fear. And I then made the decision when I was like 15 that I needed to go to residential treatment because just going and doing ERP one day a week with my therapist wasn't sufficient in what I needed to get better. So I went to residential treatment and did a bunch of other intensive treatment afterwards and have gotten to the point where I still do exposures. I still see my therapist. I see my therapist multiple times a week. I saw my therapist this morning. And just knowing that recovery is a lifelong process and is something that will ebb and flow. And I think in the end, just realizing how worth it is and how you can really come to live your life despite having OCD and all the harm and distress that it brings. Okay, so I'm going to start going into some of the questions now. Let's see. And how I typically answer the questions is I try to find the ones that I can generalize to the most people, and then we'll kind of go toward the more specific ones closer to the end. Let's see. Okay, this is a great question. How to handle the intrusive emotions that come with OCD, feeling like I want the things my thoughts are mentioning, and the disconnection I feel because of it is so hard. So I know that many of us probably relate to that, and just especially having intrusive thoughts, intrusive images, just intrusive sensations and feelings, and how it can feel so scary and so real. And what I always kind of have come to embrace is the fact that, well, the fear is real, the threat is not. And I think that with OCD, it tries to make us believe that what we're experiencing, the thoughts that we're having, everything that feels so real is a threat to us, is a threat to our morality and the type of person that we are, and that it could potentially jeopardize the image that we have of ourselves and who we think of ourselves as individuals. And I think that coming to really realize that and acknowledge all the distress that these thoughts bring, but also recognizing that they are ego dystonic. And just let me go ahead and explain what that is. So, ego dystonic, means that the thoughts or experiences that someone may have go against the individual's sense of self. So if someone's having thoughts about hurting themselves or others in as OCD, let me just clarify that. OCD thoughts, because obviously someone could potentially be having thoughts about hurting themselves that are not related to OCD, that are related to depression or something else, but this is just specifically for OCD. Um, just knowing that those thoughts go against the individual's sense of self and aren't reflective of that individual, their character, or who they are as an individual. So if someone with OCD is having these thoughts about hurting other people, about killing themselves, about what their sexual orientation is, despite having a really clear idea of that, um, in another part of their identity. So I think just knowing that though these thoughts that someone may be experiencing are really, really distressing, that they actually aren't reflective in any form of who the individual is. And I think that's something that's one of the scarier parts about OCD is when you start having these intrusive thoughts, they feel so, so real. And I know when my intrusive thoughts were really, really bad for some time, I felt that I was a terrible person. I was like, why am I having these thoughts? What does this mean about me? Do I actually want to do these thoughts? And just the whole idea are that these thoughts are intrusive. They kind of delve into like a deep part of ourselves where we start questioning like just our entire selves, and that can be really distressing. And I think for me coming to realize that thoughts are just thoughts, they're really nothing more than that, and they're only more than that if you give them the power to do so. And obviously, it takes a really long time to get to that point. But the more that you sit with the uncertainty, the more that you acknowledge the presence of your thoughts, but not necessarily do compulsions to reduce the anxiety or the distress that these thoughts may cause, the more you're going to be able to tolerate them. But intrusive thoughts definitely are one of the worst parts of having OCD. And I think that is one of the parts that people, when they look in from the outside, don't really understand. I mean, because one thing to clarify is that everyone has intrusive thoughts, regardless of whether or not they have OCD. Everyone has intrusive thoughts. Although it may feel like you're the only one experiencing these thoughts, I guarantee you that someone that you know who does not have OCD is having pretty similar thoughts. But the difference between someone with OCD and someone without OCD is that someone who with OCD who has this thought is going to just hyperfixate on it, is going to ruminate on it, is going to start just delving deep into the thought and trying to figure out what it means and trying to contextualize it. And whereas someone without OCD, they're going to see the thought, they're going to experience the thought, they're going to be like, "Oh, that's a weird thought." And they're just going to move on with their day. So for people with OCD, the thoughts just tend to be a little stickier to the point where they're just really kind of stick in your mind once they come, and that can be really challenging. Okay, and that's the same way with the emotions and the sensations um, attributed to OCD intrusive thoughts. Okay, gonna find another question. Okay. Is it possible I've struggled with mild SOOCD, which is sexual orientation OCD, for the majority of my life, but the pandemic has worsened it? So I just wanted to say that oftentimes, and especially I know for a lot of people with OCD, a lot of people in the OCD community, during the pandemic, their OCD spiked tremendously. And I think for a lot of people, and just want to preface this that I am not a professional, I'm not a therapist, but I am an individual with OCD. And this is all based on the knowledge that I've gained through my treatment, through my advocacy work, and just things that I continue to learn about OCD. So I'm not able to provide any clinical advice or suggestions, but I can guide you or people to resources in general, because I do know some of those and they can be really helpful, especially in OCD. But back to my main point. I think for a lot of people during the pandemic, their OCD became more severe. And I think that was probably due to the fact that many of us were isolated. Many of us were staying inside constantly, and we're home from work, we're home from school. We're just not able to engage in the things that they typically engage in daily life, and just going outside and being with other people and socializing. And I think for people with OCD, being isolated also meant being isolated with their thoughts and just with their symptoms. And I think for a lot of people, especially when they're home, and I know for me, when I'm kind of isolated in a space by myself, and when I really don't have a lot that I'm doing, my OCD tends to spike, in the sense where I will start having more intrusive thoughts. I'll start obsessing more. And I think that it just naturally makes sense that if you are isolated for such a long period of time due to COVID, and because of all just the social withdrawal, it would make a lot of sense um, if someone's OCD was to worsen. But I know that there are one thing that really helped me, I think, during the pandemic, especially with having OCD, is really utilizing all the resources in the OCD community. I know that NoCD has so many incredible resources. They have support groups, you can do individual therapy, ERP. I also find some amazing resources through the OCD community on Instagram, which I have an account where I share my own experiences in recovery, provide tips and advice, and just kind of share about my life too, as a 19-year-old and as a college student and as someone in recovery from OCD. But yeah, I think for me, really finding that sense of community and being able to have friends who have OCD and just engage in conversations about what we're experiencing can make a lot of these things less isolating and less lonely, and also build community in the sense that, oh, so many other people are struggling a lot more during the pandemic like I did. And that's a really comforting feeling to know you're not alone, because I know OCD can make you feel really isolated and alone in your thoughts, and like you're the only one experiencing what you're experiencing. When in reality, there are so many other people experiencing throughout the world, experiencing the exact same thing as you. Okay, let's see. Okay. Hey, I have sexual orientation OCD symptoms as a queer teenager. Any advice? So I know that with OCD is it comes to attack the things that you value the most, attack the things that you love the most, that are truest to yourself. So I know for me, my OCD really came to attack my schoolwork, because I'm someone who really loves school. I love learning. I love education. And that was something that was really difficult, because I found that my OCD, when there was something that I really loved or was really proud of or was a really big part of me, my OCD would just automatically, um, almost just instantly click onto that whole other part of me. And that was really, really hard. And although I haven't really experienced sexual orientation OCD, I know that that whole experience, and just even the experience in itself as a teenager of coming to figure out who you are, of coming to figure out your sexual orientation. And that can be such a process in itself. But I'm sure that adding just OCD on top of it can make that experience so much more difficult. So I think that in regards to just generalizing it to all different forms of OCD or different subtypes of OCD, just tackling it the same way you would any other type of OCD, and also distinguishing what's OCD, what's not OCD, because I know that there can be questions associated when trying to figure out your sexuality, when trying to figure out these really big parts of yourself. And there's a lot of uncertainty that comes with that. And there's also so much uncertainty that comes with OCD. So just, both of those together could just make for even more uncertainty. So I would just say tackling it the same way that you would any other OCD subtype, through exposure and response prevention. And I know that there are so many people on Instagram who have some really great resources on that. I'm pretty sure NoCD has done posts on their account about sexual orientation OCD, if I recall correctly. But I know that's a theme that so many people struggle with, and just the way that they deal with it is still acknowledging themselves and their identity and hold that to be true, but also trying to understand that OCD, regardless, is going to make you question that. Even if it's something that part of you is so, so, so sure of, and know that this is the part of you, but the other part of the OCD part of you is just going to make you question that even more. So I think also during that whole process of figuring yourself out and figuring out who you are, what you identify as, and also as someone with OCD, I think that you just have to give yourself so much love and kindness and during this time, and just know that you are experiencing a lot, but that you have the strength, and all of you have the strength to get through it and just push past it, even though it is going to take time. It is going to take a lot of work. But just knowing that the work and the time spent tackling it and doing exposure and response prevention will really be worth it. Okay. Hi, I was wondering how to handle the thought that I will never be who I was before OCD. I feel like my personality, thoughts, and values are gone. It's very scary and hard. So I can really relate to this whole idea. I know when my OCD was at its worst, which was probably when I was around 15, 16, that was when my OCD was at its absolute worst. I felt like I no longer recognized myself, which is just such a scary feeling. Because, like I was mentioning before in relation to sexual orientation, I think OCD will just make you doubt and question everything, especially to the point where you question yourself and where you just become so consumed by the disorder that it can just overtake you and your life. But I think that realizing that the person that you are becoming through doing exposures and through doing treatment is going to be essentially the better version of yourself, because you're going to be able to combat your OCD. Likely you'll be a lot happier, because I know for me, I did really grieve the person that I lost to OCD in a degree just before. But then when I look back, I start seeing how much of that time, well, it doesn't seem prior that it was like that I was experiencing OCD then, when I look back and think about it much more deeply, I realized that OCD impacted every part of my life, and that even the parts that I thought weren't tainted by OCD, or I wasn't experiencing OCD, I was. And I think just realizing that all the fear and all the anxiety that I experienced as a child were because of OCD. And I lived all those years in fear and really struggling. But it wasn't until I was 12 that I received an official diagnosis of OCD. And I kind of saw, for a while, I think I saw my diagnosis as the point of when I lost myself. But I think just seeing that when I started to really embrace recovery, when I became my truest, most authentic self and better self, was when I was in recovery, because I just got to be the person who wasn't consumed and controlled by my OCD. I was able to enjoy and live life. And I think I was also able to discover so many other things about myself that I didn't even know were there. Like, one thing that I think about, this is something that I've dealt with a lot, is the whole idea of like OCD being such a big part of your identity, but also that idea of how it changes you so much. And I think just trying to come to terms with that is a lot. And I just want to validate everyone's experiences with that because I know how stressful it can be and just how confusing it can be also. But I think just learning through my OCD, I really found a lot of my passions. Well, it's taken so much from me, it's also given me so much in regards to being in recovery and really seeing, like, I don't think I would be a psychology major if I was um, if I didn't have OCD. I don't think I would be in advocacy work surrounding mental health if I didn't have OCD. And I also don't think I would be as compassionate and as empathetic as I am because of my OCD. Because of my OCD, I've come to really see and I guess acknowledge all the invisible battles that people are fighting. And I don't think I would have understood that to the extent if I didn't have OCD. And I think also going into recovery for OCD, you can also kind of see all the ways that OCD was really limiting you and just finding things that you're really interested in. Um, Even though OCD makes kind of convinces you that you're not interested in it. Like one example is my main facet of OCD is perfectionism OCD. I struggle a lot with it. And one thing that I struggled with, it was kind of just a minor thing, or it wasn't a minor thing, was painting my nails. I could not paint my nails due to my perfectionism OCD because I would just constantly be redoing it, and just the imperfection of it just would increase my anxiety tremendously. And then I would just instantly take off my nail polish afterwards because it didn't fit that image of perfection. And it was just a really anxiety provoking experience for me. But once I began doing exposures like about a year ago with painting my nails, it's actually become one of my favorite things to do. It's one of like my forms of self-care. I can show you right now. Oh, there we go. But I paint my nails every week. I love doing it. And I don't think I would have realized that, even though it's a minor thing, if I didn't have OCD. And that's just one small example of all that you can kind of come to discover through OCD, and that you're not necessarily losing yourself. You're just seeing yourself in a new way and just a new, better version of yourself. Let's see. Let's see. These are so many good comments. Um, let's see. Hmm. Okay, this is a great one. I try to explain my OCD to other people, and they never understand. It makes it hard when they watch me give in to my compulsive behaviors. Okay, this is a hard one. I think I felt for so long in my recovery so much distance between myself, and especially because the main part of when I was experiencing my worst OCD was when I was in high school. And I think for a while, my OCD really prevented me from being able to connect with my peers, especially my peers who didn't have OCD. I found myself really able to connect with the people who I met when I was in residential treatment, partial hospitalization, intensive outpatient, and support groups. I really found myself able to make strong connections with them because we kind of had this unspoken dialogue in the sense that they just got it. Like they would see me struggling, having a hard time, trying not to engage in a compulsion, and they would just instantly understand what I was going through. And I think there was so much beauty in that. And just that was such like a validating experience because I felt that I just was understood for kind of the first time because there's only so much validation that a professional can give you. Although they really understand it clinically, they likely don't understand it from the perspective of someone who does have OCD. And I think just meeting other people with OCD was just one of the most helpful things for me But I think also realizing that I did want to make connections with the people at school, those who didn't have OCD. And I think I was really confused for a while on how I was to do that. I think also realizing for me, which this was kind of a hard realization to come to, was that they'll never understand to the extent what I experience, regardless of how hard I try. There are some of my friends who really, really get it and have really taken the time and listened to what I say and share my experiences, and really try to like, I have a ton of my friends, those from my high school and those from my college. They follow my Instagram account and they try to learn more about OCD. And learning more about OCD for them has also helped them in their own unique ways, and also just to understand the ways in which OCD is, significantly misrepresented in the media and in our society. But I think for me, just knowing that understanding and explaining OCD to people without OCD was not going to happen overnight. I think just understanding that it's such a difficult disorder to explain. I think even though I've been living my entire life with OCD and have been in recovery since I was like started my journey to recovery when I was 14. So that's almost, it'll soon be 6 years, when I turn 20 in May, which is really crazy to think about. But the thing is, I'm still learning more about OCD. And it's almost been 6 years, which is crazy to even think about. But back to my point is that I'm still learning about OCD and I'm someone who lives with OCD. So I think just trying to educate people in small chunks and just kind of not set too high expectations for them, and trying to know that they're going to understand it and they're going to try and learn it about it on their own time, and then it's not just going to happen overnight. But I do understand how frustrating of an experience it can be and how it can feel so isolating to not be understood by these people. But I think also, if they are people in your life who are there, whether it be a significant other, whether it be really close friends or family, I think that those people, the people who love you the most and care about you the most and are so invested in your life, will want to take the time to learn about it and understand what you're experiencing. So I think there are so many great resources that you can provide people. I know that the International OCD Foundation, the IOCDF, they have so many great resources on their website, especially resources for loved ones, just educational resources. I know that NoCD has incredible resources, and all throughout Instagram, there are so many other incredible accounts that share so much important information about OCD and about the experiences of it, and just trying to break it down in a much more simplified fashion. So I would say those are just some great ways to do it. And just also how they can best support you, I think, is really important also. And I know a lot of these resources really delve deep into that, because that's something where, because OCD can be so tricky and so sneaky, the way that someone might assume would be helpful, like reassurance, for instance, some people from just an outside perspective would think, oh, reassurance is going to help someone with OCD. Helping them engage in their compulsions is going to help someone with OCD, when actually all those things are doing more harm than good. And I think that's a really hard realization for people to come to and just understand. So I think I know I've been going on about this for a long time, but just coming to understand that it is going to take time, but that these people will also want to learn. Okay. Can life transitions be tough for people with OCD? Any tips? So I find life transitions really, really tricky. And I'm sure most of that is attributed to my OCD, and just anxiety in general. I think one of the hardest parts with like life transitions and just the way it interacts with your OCD is just the uncertainty. Um, associated with both, because oftentimes when you're going through a major life transition, and for me, like ones that I'm thinking of is just entering college, because that was a really big life transition for me. And I think one of the bigger ones that I've experienced, or one of the few big ones that I've experienced now as a 19-year-old. And I'll continue to experience many of these really big life transitions in the future. But I think just acknowledging that it's going to be difficult. And that it also, someone, just their experience with the transition will be very different. Like, although all these people have OCD, they might experience life transitions in a totally different way. But I know for me, I think the thing that makes life transitions so much more difficult is just the uncertainty associated with it. I think when I began college, I think the biggest thing that made my life, that transition, so challenging was the fear that my OCD was going to get bad again. I think that was a really big fear for me because I was in recovery. And for so long, we didn't think I'd be able to go to college away from home. We didn't think that would be a possibility just because of how severe and debilitating my OCD was. And realizing that I was able to get to that point and go to college, and that was such a huge milestone for me. I think then realizing that there is still a ton of fear and trauma associated with having really severe OCD, and just that fear of it getting bad again. And I think that was like the biggest thing that made the transition to college so much more difficult, because I know that the uncertainty can be really difficult. And I just was so worried that my OCD would spike again and get really severe. So I think during those transitions, it's really important to just make sure you implement more support for yourself, and just take that time and set aside time to practice self care, do the things that make you really happy. If you have a therapist, maybe scheduling some extra appointments with them. Just trying to really heavily rely on your support system, and just communicate to your friends and to your family, who do know that you have OCD and who do acknowledge and understand the struggles associated with it to a degree, that this transition or this change may be difficult for me, and just letting them know that prior to it, and just explaining how you most feel supported in these situations. I think that can really make a big difference, because I know when I was making the transition to college, I talked to my therapist a lot more. I was constantly FaceTiming with my parents and with my close friends. And that was something that really helped me. I was watching like some of my favorite like comfort shows, and doing things that I knew would really relax me during such a stressful and kind of high intensity time. So I think there are ways to really help and support yourself, knowing and acknowledging that OCD transitions are probably going to be more difficult than someone experiencing the same transition without OCD. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Um, Trying to find, let's see. Oh, here's some good one. How much better do you think you are now? Are you experiencing a lot less distress than in the past? Okay. I think this is a very good question, because for a while my OCD was just off the walls. It consumed my life and I really was not functioning. And it was really, really miserable and really terrible. And just even thinking back to it, it's just a really hard time to think back to. But I think when thinking back to that, one of the things that I experienced is just seeing how far I've come. Um, I think this time, like 4 or 5 years ago, I would have never envisioned myself being in the place that I am at today. Although I do still experience stress and I still experience anxiety and depression and symptoms associated with OCD, I still take medication. I still see my therapist. I still struggle, but I am doing so much better than I ever anticipated. And that's because of me, but so much so because of ERP, exposure and response prevention, really conquering and really tackling my OCD head on really made all the difference. And when I was doing it, I was like, why am I doing this? This is so miserable. Tackling my fears and just how scary that can be. At the time, it didn't seem worth it. But as I continued to make progress, the more I realized how worth it was and how worthwhile the treatment is and just how rewarding it can be. Um like I think just oftentimes too what's really great is I'll just be doing something in my day and I'll think back and I'll be like, "Wait, I wouldn't have been able to do that a few years ago." A few months ago even. Like super random. But last night I love Euphoria. I'm sure many other people do too, but that used to be such a huge exposure for my OCD. It was maybe about a year ago, my therapist and we started working on watching Euphoria because it had a lot of really big triggers in it for my OCD, one of which was violence. And Euphoria has a lot of that. And I think I was like, I'm never going to like this. I'm never going to watch this. This is just way too triggering for my OCD. This is way, I can't do this. And last night, and for the past, however, like 8 weeks that the past season has been airing, I've been watching it willingly. I enjoy watching it. And just even seeing all the things, all the triggers. And while it does cause me distress in the moment, I'm like, wait, I can really do this. I am watching it. I am fully engaged with it, even though it is really anxiety provoking. But just seeing how the distress that I experienced when I first watched it to the distress that I'm experiencing right now when I watch it is a lot different. So even just seeing those examples of just the progress that you've made, even if it's like within a short amount of time, can be so rewarding. And I think that's one of the things that makes OCD treatment so worthwhile and such an important part of recovery is just acknowledging how far you've come. It can be so easy to just automatically be, wait, I have still so much that I need to conquer in regards to my OCD. There are so many things that I need to work on and get better at, but don't disregard all the progress that you've made. Don't minimize all the hard work that you've put in because it's hard work. And this is something that my parents always said to me, and same with my therapist, that probably going through OCD therapy and going through ERP and having severe OCD and also being able to conquer it, probably the hardest thing I'll ever have to do in my life. So, like, there are a lot of things that I think I thought were going to be a lot harder for me, but just having OCD and just learning to tolerate distress and discomfort and uncertainty has made me so much more resilient against the things that typically will knock people down. And that's not to say that I still don't get knocked down because I do. I still do struggle a lot. And that's just a part of the experience. Like recently, there have just been some different life things going on that have been really hard for me, and have triggered some OCD, have triggered a lot of anxiety. But just realizing that there are going to be bumps in the road during recovery, but that it will be really worthwhile in the end, getting to that point of recovery and really doing the work for yourself. Okay. Let's see. Let's see. I love just seeing everyone sharing their experiences in the chat. I think that's so amazing. I'm reading how so many of you have been able to conquer your fears in regards to OCD. And that's such a big thing. And that's so important. And I think that's something that you should all be so, so proud of. Let's see. I'm going to look at, let's see. Let's see. This one's a great one. What are your thoughts regarding medication? It has helped me a lot personally, but at first I was petrified by intrusive thoughts around taking it. Maybe there are others who feel or have felt this. I know a lot of people, that's a really common experience, I think, for people with OCD, just the fear associated with medications. I know a lot of people, when they start taking medications, and even if they don't have OCD, will automatically fear, wait, what if this changes who I am? What if this makes me a different person? I think there's just so much stigma associated with psychiatric medications, but not enough acknowledgement for how much it can help someone. And I think with OCD, there can be a lot of obsessions and intrusive thoughts linked to taking medications, and just like the thoughts of like, what if I overdose? What if I become addicted? Just all these different thoughts. But I know for me, not giving anyone reassurance, but knowing how much medication has helped me. And also knowing that medication and just finding the medication that's right for you, obviously with the help of a psychiatrist taking the guiding, um, being the guiding force in this process, but also just being really communicative about what's most helpful for you, what's not helpful for you. I think that for me, my medication really helped me to better access my ERP. I think when my OCD was so, so severe, I think I almost was too severe to even be able to engage in the therapy. And so I think medication for me has really helped me to just give me like a little platform, a little ladder to kind of get to the point where I need to be at in order to actually engage in the treatment, engage in the ERP. So I think it can be really helpful. But I think one of the things that can be really discouraging with medications is when it doesn't work instantly. I know that for me, medication has been just a weird process in trying to figure out what works best for me, and I'm still trying to figure it out. And just what might really help one person may not help another person, and that's all due to just being different people, having different bodies, responding differently to things. But I think just really knowing that it can be really, really helpful for OCD. Of course, in addition to ERP, because ERP, I want to emphasize, is life saving and can really make all the difference in OCD recovery. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, perfect. What are some ways? I think this would honestly be a great question to probably end this live off of. What are the ways you have connected with others with OCD apart from the NoCD app? In my program, the group aspect was the most impactful. It relieved me of so much of the shame associated. I completely understand that. I think for me personally, prior to entering residential treatment when I was 14 or 15, I don't think I realized how isolated I was. I only thought OCD presented in the way that I was experiencing it. I didn't realize all the different presentations of OCD and how it can differ tremendously from one individual to the next. But I think just also realizing that in finding those people and finding that community can be so, so helpful. So I encourage you to, one really big way that I found community is through Instagram. That's been such like a lifesaver for me. I run an Instagram account called The Road to Recovery from OCD. I can actually put the link to it in the chat. But that's just my Instagram, and I'm always happy to connect with people, especially if they just need someone to talk to. I love doing that. I am very busy, but I love doing that when I do have the free time. But I can also recommend some other great accounts. I love Allegra Caston's account on Instagram, Obsessively Ever After. I love Maya's account, Overcoming OCD. I love the OCD Doodles. I love Obsessively OCD. There's so many. Anxiety OCD treatment, um, your anxiety toolkit. There are so many. Oh my gosh. I'm like blanking at this moment, but there are so many incredible accounts. And kind of what I found is when you start finding an account, you can see who those accounts tag, and they have so many other things. And you kind of go down this like rabbit hole of finding so many incredible resources. For people with OCD. And also, another great thing, I know this isn't fully accessible to everyone, but it is such a great resource, is the IOCDF conferences. I went to the IOCDF conference prior to the pandemic. The one prior to the pandemic was in 2019 in Austin, Texas. And that was such an incredible experience because I got to connect with all these people in person, it was honestly one of the times when I felt the happiest and most like myself. Um, and I think that for me, I know that they have been having the online OCD conferences, which can be much more accessible for people. And I know that they do have the OCD conference this year, which is going to be in Denver, Colorado. So those are such great ways. And I know that at IOCDF also, just to make it more financially accessible to people, they do offer great scholarships for these programs and to make them open to more people. But those are such great ways to connect with other people. And even if you see someone in the comments of an Instagram who's talking about their experiences, even reaching out to them and just making these connections, because I guarantee you that most people with OCD have felt alone at some point, and they want to help people feel less alone and want to continue to make these connections. And I think they're so worthwhile. So I just want to end this live by saying that you all are so strong, and that what you're experiencing in your current situation is not going to be what you're going to experience forever. And just knowing that you do have the ability, through exposure and response prevention and putting in the work and putting in the time to be able to live your life to your fullest. There are still going to be bumps in the road, but the recovery and the treatment are beyond worthwhile. So I'm just sending all my love and strength out to each and every one of you. And I hope you all have a great rest of your night. Bye.